The 50-year period between 1890 and 1940 produced the first wave of books on lifts and lift technology. The books published during this period represent a diverse collection in terms of their authors, national origins, publishers, and content. This material is conceptually positioned as one of four distinct bodies of lift literature. Books, which we'll talk about today, articles published in technical journals, papers published in the proceedings of technical societies, and manufacturer catalogs. While the following examination will reveal an occasional blurring of the lines between these categories, the presence of a standalone book on a given topic changes our understanding of the material. This is best illustrated by the difference between reading an article in a journal and reading the same text republished in a book. The context of the journal, which includes advertisements, editorials, other articles, coupled with differences in presentation and format, suddenly affects our appraisal of the content. The presence of a book also indicates that a publisher perceived that a market existed to justify the investment in its production. Thus, the appearance of this body of literature in the first half of the 20th century may be taken as a key sign of the emergence of the field of lift engineering. We begin in the late 1890s. The weekly issues of Le Génie Civil, published between August 29th and October 17, 1896, featured an 8-part series on lifts written by French engineers Georges Dumont and Gustave Bagnière. The articles presented a broad overview which addressed hydraulic, electrohydraulic, and electric lifts. Dumont, Bagnière, and Le Génie Civil may have planned from the start to republish this series. And in 1897, one of the first books on lifts appeared, Les Ascenseurs. You see the full title on the screen. And when I say book, it is in book form, but it's very inexpensive paper, a paperback. It was not published as a hardback book. The full, unedited text of the articles is reprinted, accompanied by the 70 illustrations prepared for the magazine. And what I'll do for each of the books, or almost all of them but one, here's a sample page. And one of the things we can see is not only an illustration in this instance of a hydraulic system, but the authors also included the formulas that went along with the design of those systems. So they're a very useful technical resource. In 1898, 2 years later, the second book on lifts appeared. However, now the setting was the United States, and the topic was not technology, but law. James A. Webb's The Law of Passenger and Freight Elevators offered readers an introduction to the legal issues associated with the installation and use of lifts. This is the cover page of the second edition. Webb published his second edition in 1905, which was almost twice the size of the first, a fact that perhaps speaks to the litigious nature of American society. That book is also particularly interesting because then why the lawsuits were filed often spoke to how the lifts were used, or misused, or misunderstood, and how the technology was interpreted by its users. So it's a very interesting way to come to technology, not through the sources on technology, but from a very different viewpoint. 1905 also saw the publication of a book that focused solely on on hydraulic lift technology, William Baxter Jr.'s Hydraulic Elevators. Baxter, an American engineer, was a prolific author, and his book was primarily a collection of authors that he had written for the American Machinist and the Engineer magazine. However, unlike Dumont and Bagnière, Baxter edited and rewrote several of his articles for this new publication. Produced by the Engineer Publishing Company of Chicago, the book was sufficiently popular to attract the attention of a major publishing house, McGraw-Hill, and in 1910 they published a revised and substantially expanded edition titled Hydraulic Elevators, Their Design, Construction, Operation, Care, and Management. Baxter's books are noteworthy for their detailed line drawings of hydraulic lift systems and their broad coverage of the American lift industry. This is for the first edition, and just 2 sample pages of the types of information found, both drawings done from photographs here of horizontal push engines, and then an example of the line drawing, which is a bit difficult to read, so we'll make it easier, spread across 2 pages, but you get an idea of the detail of information provided on these systems. For the second edition, with the expanded title, similar images both on the left and then detailed drawings on the right, and also images such as this, which shows the piping arrangement for an entire hydraulic system, which is, although a system this old would probably be very difficult to find today in the States. Sometimes when I find one of them, I'll go back to these sources and use those as a way to figure out what's going on. Although there seems to be a great discrepancy between the sort of clean lines that you find in a textbook and what someone actually does in a building. The expanded edition of Baxter's book was preceded in 1908 by the publication of Reginald Bolton's Elevator Service and Ludwig Hinz's Handbook der Aufzugtechnik. Bolton, an English engineer who practiced in the United States from 1894 to 1942, self-published his book, which was the first book devoted to lift traffic analysis. First book that I found anyway, 1910. He developed a series of formulas and charts that were designed to provide a mathematical means and basic theory for determining a given building's transportation needs. So this is one of his charts showing the approximate elevator travel in business buildings, travel up, travel down at various points throughout the day. You can read the timeline across the top. Another chart scheduled for a local elevator. And then I just pulled this, which shows some of the information of how he put his formulas together. I will confess it's a book I've gone through. There are points in it where I have no idea where the numbers come from and how he derived them. But this gives you some idea of elevator traffic science very early in the 20th century. The fact that Bolton's book was self-published makes it difficult to gauge its impact. However, the presence of copies in approximately 30 U.S. libraries across the United States indicates that it's reasonable to assume that it had a wide distribution. German engineer Ludwig Hinz's Handbook der Aufzugtechnik provides a well-illustrated overview of belt-driven hydraulic and electric lift systems in Germany. The book also includes a discussion of lift safeties and typical local codes governing lift operation. And this is another thing that you can find particularly in German books, additional information on codes, and in some instances they're key to the cities where the books are published. This is a relatively small book, but has a series of extraordinary images, both photographs. Here we see smaller hydraulic systems, and then wonderful detailed drawings of installation, which gives an incredible understanding of how these systems actually work. And for research purposes, it's very easy to sort of take and pull them apart. The first decade of the 20th century ended with the publication of two small books, and I mean small books, both of which prompt questions about their publication history. The first, by American engineer Calvin F. Swingle, was titled Elevators, Hydraulic and Electric, Their Construction, Care, and Operation. This book was described by its author as a catechism that included, quote, a thorough drill regarding the construction and care of lifts and their necessary adjuncts, end quote, as well as instruction on, quote, correct and incorrect, safe and unsafe methods to be pursued in their operation, end quote. This was an ambitious agenda for a 100-page book that measures only 6.75 by 4.5 inches. However, this little book may have derived from a larger source. Its first illustration, first image we find, is labeled Figure 380, Otis Traction Elevator. Unfortunately, Swingle did not provide an explanation for this numbering convention, and a connection to a larger work, perhaps an encyclopedia, has not been found. This is also one of the few elevator books where there's a really very nice image of a hydraulic lift on the cover. The title page, it's also typical of the time, and in some ways today, is that some authors can't have a long enough title because it just keeps going on. We do get to change font, but we sort of get all of that covered in this tiny little blue book. And here's just a sample page showing some of the drawings. And you can see we're on page 56, and we're already up to figure 401. I'm still trying to figure out where this came from and what the source was. And there we go. The second little book to talk about has a greater page count, 174 pages instead of 100. However, it's even smaller in size, 6.5 by 4.25 inches. And its content promotes a different set of questions. And Oh, I forgot I put this in. For those of you who've been paying attention, this is another question. This is William Baxter of 1910. This is Swingle from 1910, and it's clearly the same images. And so this is another thing that characterizes some of these books, is images are repeated, and that leads to questions about, well, the transfer of information and where did they originate and who took them. And it's something that we continue to struggle with today, and that certainly with modern publishing, they're often limited to images for copyright reasons. So you see the same image repeated in book after book after book, and yet used to illustrate different things, which presents very interesting challenges to authors. The second book, titled Ascensores Hidráulicos y Electricos, and written by Spanish engineer Ricardo Yaceres. This book was number 92 in the Manuelas Gallic series, and was published, I'm not sure, sometime between 1900 and 1910. As it turns out, the book is a literal translation of Dumas and Benier's La Ascenseurs, with no acknowledgement of the original author. It also includes identical or slightly redrawn versions of the illustrations found in the original work, as an example, and then we have the full title page. A page from the book with a very nice drawing of a hydraulic lift, and this is 1897, and we just sort of flip it and redraw it for the early 20th century. Many of them are mirror images, which makes me wonder about their origin. Some of them are redrawn, some of them are identical, but the text is, if you translate the French and you translate the Spanish, word for word, it's exactly the same. Yaceres did include a new additional chapter titled New Types of Electric Lifts, and 3 new illustrations. This is an example of one of typical Spanish lift illustrations, and for the first time, a glossary of terms. This is the first time I found a glossary of lift terms included in a book, so there was some originality here. However, this remarkable act of plagiarism appears to have gone completely unnoticed by anyone. The book appears, and I believe does quite well. The second decade of the 20th century opened with the publication of Hugo Beckmann's Der Aufzugbau. This extraordinary book, and truly extraordinary, is 720 pages long and contains 1,166 illustrations, which include line drawings and black and white photographs. Many of the line drawings are large-scale fold-out illustrations, some of which depict complete system installations. And to give us an idea, there's one of those pages with the illustration folded out. And by the way, you can find this if you're a Google Books fan. You can find a PDF of this. In the PDF, none of that appears. Because when they mass scan books, they never take time to fold out illustrations. It takes too much time. You lose all of that. So you have both a sample page with a wonderful photograph of the hydraulic lift, some additional information up above, but of course adjacent to it you have this wonderful set of drawings which tells you everything you need to know about the system. And this is if we go back, this is actually a smaller fold out. Several of them open 2 different ways. You have these massive, beautifully drawn illustrations of German lift systems. And I added this one in. I know there's a talk later on paternosters. These are detailed drawings of a German paternoster system from the early 20th century. The book contains a comprehensive overview of lift technology in Germany, including hand-powered, belt-driven, hydraulic, and electric lift systems. Bethmann provided his readers with a broad technical overview of lift construction and operation, as well as an introduction to the science behind the various systems. The book is also filled at appropriate points with the formulas that go with explaining the operation of these systems. The book references over 40 German companies, 5 American companies, and 1 Italian company. Somewhat surprisingly, the only references to French systems are brief discussions of the hydraulic lifts designed by Léon Didot. And, equally surprising perhaps, Bethmann made no references to English companies or English lift systems. England doesn't appear at all. Nonetheless, given its size and the number of illustrations, this is perhaps the most interesting book published during this 50-year period. While the text is clearly and precisely written, the illustrations are its most important asset. They are beautifully drawn, highly detailed, and contain a wealth of information. American engineers contributed 2 additional books during this period. H. Robert Comer's Elevator Shaft Construction of 1912 contains a thorough examination of this topic. This focused study speaks to the increasing complexity of the systems, which is reflected in Comer's 47 illustrations of shaft details. They're not very exciting images, but the pragmatic detail that's included in them, including the presence, as we see here, of a ladder and the various shiv and machine beams and so on. It's a very unique insight into American lift operation at this time. The second book, by John S. Jawlings, was similar to Bethman's in that it offered a comprehensive review of lift types and technology. However, whereas the latter discussed systems from several countries, Jawlings' book that we see here, Elevators, a practical treatise on the development and design of hand, belt, steam, hydraulic, and electric elevators, focused exclusively on American development. The 2 works are also similar in that Bethman characterized his work as a kind of textbook, and Jawlings' book had originally been published as a 5-part series designed for a correspondence course. These individual works by Jawlings were first published in a single volume in 1915. The first edition was 217 pages long and had 172 illustrations. The second edition, the cover page we see here, appeared in 1919, was 402 pages long with 278 illustrations. Although Jawlings had added some new content to the book's original chapters, the dramatic increase in size was primarily due to the addition of a new chapter titled Equipment, Design, and Construction, which addressed over 50 separate topics. And to give a sense of the flavor of this book, staying with hydraulic elevators, horizontal system, and I apologize for you having to tilt your head. 2 other pages, various systems that are illustrated. And one of the things that we find in Baxter's book, but also in Jawlings here, this was an earlier valve design, but you also get detailed drawings of elevator components as well as overall drawings of systems. 4 authors were primarily responsible for the final group of lift books that we'll discuss this afternoon. Roland Grierson, Frederick Hymans, Fred Annett, and Reginald Phillips. In 1923, Chapman and Hall of London published Electric Lift Equipment for Modern Buildings, a practical guide to its selection, installation, operation, and maintenance, written by English engineer Ronald Grierson. The book offered readers a thorough overview of English and American lift systems, which is well illustrated and neatly compartmentalized into 24 chapters and 7 appendices. Grierson's blending of material gathered from both sides of the Atlantic may have also been strategic, for in 1924, the Van Nostrand Company of New York republished his book in the United States. The new publication differed from the original in only 2 ways. The English edition included numerous illustrations for lift companies, which were omitted from the American edition, and the word lift in the book's title was changed to elevator. There are the 2 title pages. Those were the only changes. Now, American readers, and there was on the frontispiece, and I actually made an error in my published paper, this frontispiece was also included in the American edition. And you can't read this. This says Waygood Otis down here. So for the English audience, that would have made perfect sense. For an American audience, while the technology would have made sense, they might have been puzzled by that. And the other examples that I pulled are mostly British companies. So we have direct current control panel, diagrams, again, Waygood Otis with the equipment in the basement or in the penthouse, and even very pragmatic details of lift design included in this book, some of which would have appealed to perhaps more British or American audience, depending on the detail. In 1927, German-American engineer Frederick Hymans and German engineer Axel Hellborn co-authored the modern traction elevator. And I would be fine with my German up to here, and well, let's go back, up to about here, and then you wouldn't want to have me pronounce that. So the modern traction elevator, we'll go with the translation. And the reason I'm illustrating it this way is of the books I'm talking about today, this is the only one that I don't own an original copy. I have a facsimile that I just despise because of its poor quality, and I waited until the very end to copy images for this. And in fact, I waited so long I forgot. So I don't have any image of this book, and I apologize for that. Which is unfortunate because this was the first book devoted exclusively to traction lifts. It was its sole topic. And it was the first to focus solely on the theory behind this system. While a few prior books, and I've mentioned that, had included commentaries on the theory underlying the operation of various lift systems, and a few had included the requisite mathematical formulas, their primary focus was the operational characteristics of lifts. Thus they were, as we've seen, primarily illustrated with technical drawings and photographs. In contrast, the majority of the illustrations in Hellman's and Helborn's book, the 99 illustrations feature graphs, charts, and analytical diagrams of discrete lift components. This partnership, and I apologize for not illustrating this partnership of authors of Hyman's and Helborn is also curious, for the book describes the authors actually quite clearly. It describes Hyman's as a research engineer practicing in New York, and Helborn is described as a former engineering manager for the Otis Elevator Company, now living in Stockholm. When this book was published in 1927, Hyman's was beginning his 25th year of employment with Otis. He was not a research engineer, he was embedded in Otis, and Helborn appears only to have worked for Otis for a very brief period of time. So there's a mystery here of both pairing the engineers together and what was going on with this book. 1927 also saw the publication of the first edition of American engineer Fred Annette's Electric Elevators, Their Design, Construction, Operation, and Maintenance. Annette was an associate editor for Power magazine, and his numerous articles on lifts served as the outline for the book, which addressed all types of American lift systems. The book's popularity, coupled with rapid changes in lift technology, led to the publication of an expanded second edition in 1935. One of the additions to the revised edition was a chapter titled Selecting Elevators for Office Buildings, which included formulas and tables that addressed the complex nature of lift traffic analysis in large buildings. Thus, Annette's books, while primarily focused on pragmatic topics, also touched on the critical aspects of the science of lift design and operation. This book also featured fewer illustrations, but also, in its case, fold-outs. This is a wiring diagram of an Otis-type magnetic controller. So it allows a different way to access some of the history of these devices in these extraordinarily detailed drawings. During the 1930s, Frederick Hyman's continued to write about lifts, and the result was a series of short books designed for a correspondence course. These included Electric Traction Elevators, 1931, Electric Hatchway Equipment, also from 31, Electric Elevator Motors, 1931, Electric Elevator Operation, 1931, and Care and Maintenance of Electric Elevators, 1934. These books were published as a two-volume set in 1934, and also primarily focused on electric traction lifts. However, they were in almost every aspect the polar opposite of his early theoretical work. The new books offered readers a pragmatic understanding of traction lifts and are filled, as was the case with similar works, with detailed drawings of lift systems and components. And this is just a sample illustration showing one of those lift systems illustrated, as well as a detailed fold-out of a controller and the wiring, which he very carefully labeled for his students an actual wiring diagram, just so that they knew what they were looking at. The final book published during this period was English engineer Reginald S. Bolton's Electric Lifts, a manual on the current practice and the installation, working, and maintenance of lifts. This was essentially the English equivalent of Annette's 1935 book, with the focus shifted to the British lift industry. An important difference between the two books was Phillips' explicit reference to the Building Industries National Council's 1935 Code of Practice for the Installation of Lifts and Escalators. Phillips stated that he had adopted, as far as possible, the terminology found in the Code of Practice, and that, quote, most of the safety measures embedded in the code, and were carried into his book. Although Annette was obviously familiar with the American A17 code, the third edition of which had appeared in 1931, he made no reference to the code in his book. Phillips' book continued to serve as a reference book for lift engineering throughout much of the 20th century, with 5 new editions published between 1947 and 1973. and some sample pages, and this is one of the things, at least I find most interesting. This is a car suitable for tropical climates because it has a fan. But that also leads to another interesting question about, were there differences in lifts produced for tropical climates, for part of the British Empire? Did they, or was it, to sort of borrow a phrase, one cultural size fits all? And those are questions that we often don't think about in terms of lift design and their application. So we have both cars, technical details, and also photographs of specific lift systems. And I'll wrap up very quickly. This brief survey illustrates the diversity of these books published during this period, which include general textbooks, specialized technical work, and theories. A read through these books reveals that apparently, although history does not repeat itself, apparently some things never change. Topics you can find in these books include safety, energy consumption, lift traffic efficiency, all of which were perceived to be critical aspects of lift design, much as they are today. There was also a subtle awareness that perhaps as soon as a book was published, innovations in lift design would render some or much of the text obsolete. Nonetheless, the importance of these books lies in their preserving the historical record of successful, occasionally unsuccessful, ideas which chart the origins of many of the theories that continue to guide contemporary lift design today. One of the things that I say in my paper is I ask them, I hopefully missed some books that some of you will tell me about, and as these things work, I never stop looking for things, and 2 weeks after I submitted my final paper, I found this from Italy from the late 1930s with the most dramatic lift cover yet, as only our Italian colleagues can do. The cover page, and sometimes when you buy old books you find unexpected treasures, and I'm trying to find someone whose Italian is much better for mine, because this book was designed to be left with a particular lift installation, and this is the piece of paper inside for the building where this lift went. So the idea was you sign off on the code authority, the equivalent of a code authority, and leave the book. So I'm hoping to do some more research on this to get a sense of how these particular types of books work. Thank you very much for your attention.